Just two notes related. There are books of condolence in the rotunda for both the families of the victims of the car accident, as well as for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. As the funeral for Her Majesty is being planned for next Monday, there's still some discussion as to what the timing of Council's own meeting and activities at the City will be on the 19th, but watch for more information about that. Okay, let's get to the business of General Committee. The first item on the agenda, as always, is our consent agenda, so I will read out the title associated with the recommended motions from the staff reports and items for discussion. Members of General Committee, you can ask that the item be held in order to be discussed further. If the item is not held, the motion printed on the agenda is deemed to be approved on consent. There will be no further discussion of the item this evening, and the recommendation will go forward to City Council for consideration next week, with the exception of the item regarding parkland alternative rates. That's FIN 01022. Because of the timing of the legislative timing, we are going to need to do that. That will be the only item on a Council agenda later this evening if it is sent to Council by General Committee. Okay, so on the consent agenda, staff reports. The first staff report is a confidential litigation matter regarding a zoning bylaw amendment application on Essa Road. No holds on that. That is approved by General Committee. The next item is with regards to the no parking anytime on Cuthbert Street. There we are. Anyone wish to hold that staff report? Seeing none, it's approved. We have a staff report regarding surplusing city lands for inclusion in an industrial development proposal. That's on Lockhart Road. No holds on that. That is approved. We have the business plan status as of June 30th, 2022, the second quarter report. No holds. That is approved. We have an item regarding a request for development charges deferral on OWEN Street. Hold, please. Held by Councillor Thompson. We do have the staff report regarding alternative rates for parkland. Nobody wishes to hold that. That is approved. We have a staff report regarding delegated authority to execute non-disclosure agreements. It's for the Director of Internal Audit and the City Clerk or designate. Seeing none. Approved. We have finally, we have two staff reports regarding expropriation matters. One is Mapleview Drive East Road expansion. This is east of Yonge to Prince William. No holds on that staff report. That is approved. The second expropriation staff report is regarding Huronia Road improvements. That's Lockhart to South Mackay Road East. No holds on that. It is approved. Finally, we have one further confidential litigation matter. That is an Ontario Land Tribunal appeal for Mapleview Drive.
Hold, please.
Held by Councillor Harvey. That will be dealt with in closed session at the end of the meeting. And I don't believe we have any items for discussion. Nope. So the only item that's been held by General Committee for discussion is the development charges deferral request for a project on Owen Street. Councillor Thompson, you held that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'll put the motion on the floor as printed with an amendment. That staff enter into an agreement with Junction Group on behalf of their client Traditional Senior Housing to defer the portion of development charges related to the purpose rental units, excluding the owned units, with payment in full occupancy, payment in full at occupancy, interest-free for 1 year, and thereafter adding interest at the city's 5-year moving average weighted cost on capital. And contingent on the developer applying for the building permits within 120 days of this agreement. And I can speak to that.
Okay, we have an amendment moved by Councillor Thompson. I think it's been circulated. Go ahead, Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Mayor Lehman. So reading the staff report and stuff and realizing that there's some challenges with this, I just think with it being such a big issue of our housing shortage and purpose rental, I think this is a great opportunity to kind of accelerate and hold the the developer to, incentivize, I guess, to a point to start building. I'm conscious that there is, a little bit of a financial implication, but, at the end of the day, if they build nothing, I think that's more of a burden on the finance of the corporation. So speaking with Mr. Miller and Ms. Banfield, we've come up with kind of a middle-of-the-road approach that's lessened the impact to the corporation and hopefully sees 238 senior units built in a timely manner is something I think that's important.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Thompson. Anyone wish to comment on the amendment? Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Question for staff. Probably Mr. Miller would be the best one to answer this, because I know there's some concerns raised in the initial staff report in regards to setting a precedent that's never been set before. And even with this amendment, am I safe in assuming that this is setting a new precedent that the city has never done before? Because part of my concern is if we set a new precedent, we've got, especially the biggest one that comes to mind is the Smart Centers development, which is all rentals, which is going to be way more, several hundred units over this. And if we were to pass this, would it have implications for other developers like Smart Centers to come knocking at the door looking for the same thing?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harvey. Basically, you hit the nail on the head. That was sort of staff's concern. It's as the report identifies, the province recently changed the act to encourage development of rentals by giving the longer-term payment plan, but they specifically made it for the building had to be all rental units. So there is that risk from a if you set a precedent here, then you may have others that will come forward asking for the same arrangement. As we indicated in the report, the City of Barrie is relying heavily on development charge to pay the bills. So if you have approved too many of these sort of approaches, then that could be a challenge, resulting in potential of altering our capital plan.
Thank you. And just a follow-up to that, probably Ms. Banfield would probably be the best one to answer. Like, I know this is specific to seniors housing. Do we have any other rental seniors projects in the pipeline that could potentially come knocking at the door if we were to say that this decision was made solely because this is seniors rental units?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harvey. None that I can think of that are at this particular stage. I just would caution that we really can't zone for people or for the age of occupants. So just wanted to caution that for Council.
Great, thank you. Unfortunately, with the answers that I've received from staff, I'd have difficulty in supporting this because it does set a whole different precedent for the city. And I think it actually creates a much larger liability than what the motion would actually succeed in creating, because we've got so many rental units in the pipeline that could come knocking at the door and cost us a significant amount of millions of dollars in delayed DCs coming in. So I will not support this.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Councillor Riepma.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I have a couple of questions for staff as well. I'm very concerned about the precedent, and I guess the question that I have is the precedent that we're setting here dealing with a partial building that is partially rental and partially ownership? And is that the distinction that we need to make on this one? In other words, is that the precedent we're setting? And I guess the other question that I have is the 120 days of this agreement. I really like the idea of putting a time limit on picking up a building permit. The difficulty that I see with this wording at the moment is that how long will it take to get this agreement done? It could take, who knows, if they stall away, it could be a year or two, and then we're still no further ahead. So I'm just wondering if there's another wording that would help us with that. Anyway, those are two questions that I have, and I'd be interested in what the answers are.
Mr. Miller?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, I'll take a shot at part of it, and someone else is free to jump in. I think your question on the reason this particular request is sort of outside of the legislation is because while there is a substantial number of residential, like it's 273 residential units, and apparently 223 are dedicated to be rental. So if that's all they were building, the legislation, this would be they'd be open to the deferral. The legislation did not contemplate any owner-occupied units, so that's kind of the outlier in the piece of it. So to your question, are you setting a precedent? Could be. I mean, it's ultimately a policy decision of the city. It's one we haven't really looked at in collection with all the other policies that are going on at the same time. But the risk would be you would have others that may try and look to, maybe it's a lot less units and maybe it's one rental unit, and you'd have to set parameters around that. So that would be the risk I would suggest. In terms of clarifying the language to make it, can we get an agreement done quickly? I think I probably might have to defer to Ms. Bansfield in terms of where they are in the development process. I don't think that the actual agreement wouldn't be overly complicated to put together, but I'd have to defer to Michelle if she has any insight into that.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma. This applicant is not quite at the site plan approval stage yet. They don't have they have their conditional approval, but they don't have their final drawings to move into that final site plan agreement with the legal department. In the past, it's a separate agreement that's dealt with DC deferrals, and again, we use our colleagues in legal. Those agreements are actually pretty, we work with finance as well. They're actually pretty simple agreements, so I don't think that timing is necessarily an issue, except for the fact that, as I said, we're not quite at that stage of those final site plan drawings just yet.
Just to follow up then, on the timing, I wonder if we shouldn't put an outside date on it so that if they're not at site plan approval yet, then we might be, who knows, another 120 or 200 days before we get site plan approval, and then after that, another 120 days. So we might be looking at pushing towards a year. So I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions as to how we might screw this down a little tighter.
Were you looking for an answer from staff on that?
Yes, I think, I wonder if maybe Ms. Banfield has a comment on that.
Go ahead, Ms. Banfield.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Rietma. So they do have conditional site plan approval. If you're aware, we do the issue conditions, and then often that requires either updated studies, finalized plans. So they do have their conditional approval. It's those final plans that aren't quite done yet. It's my understanding that the latest circulation is in place and maybe completed very shortly, but then it does kind of then kick over to the legal department to finalize that site plan agreement. Councillor Harvey and I, or Councillor Harvey, apologies, Councillor Thompson and I did talk about the timing, about whether the 120 days would be enough, but I think we're pretty close, so I'm not too concerned about that, to be honest.
Councillor Rietma. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. So hearing the discussion that's happened so far, I'm not really concerned about setting a precedent. What I am concerned with is the fact that home prices in Barrie have almost tripled in the last 10 years. What I am concerned with is the fact that condo prices have more or less doubled in the last 10 years. What I am concerned with is that rents continue to be in the top of the entire country, even though we are not a world-class city. We're getting there, Councillor McCann, but we're not a world-class city, and we're not an economic engine of this country. That is what I'm concerned about. So I actually want this almost to become a precedent. I want this to be a great message that Councillor Thompson's amendment sends. And this is the way the province and the feds are moving. You're already hearing it from the Affordability Housing Task Force report earlier this year. You're hearing it from a newly minted federal leader, and you're hearing it from other levels of government where they're going to tie money they give to municipalities based on the amount of housing they build. And they're going to say, show us things you could have done to get housing built. This is exactly the kind of creative thing that can get housing built. We're not forgiving development charges. We are getting them to that final step. And based on the answers Ms. Banfield said about how ready they and close they are, is something that I think is totally, absolutely practical. The way I see this amendment, members of council, is we have two options. We do this, and someone maybe possibly asks us for more money for another project, in which case that council can say yes or no, develop policies, and figure it out. The second option is we don't do this, and we don't do it directly, but indirectly, we allow another corner of our downtown to be sterilized, and we miss more units coming onto the market, regardless of whether they're market rent or private rent. I'm not so much concerned about a theoretical possibility. I'm trying to focus on Councillor Thompson's amendment, what it allows us to do to strengthen our downtown core and provide more housing. Because I know one outcome I don't want, and that's home prices, rent prices, or condo prices to triple again in another 10 years. So I'll be supporting your amendment, Councillor Thompson.
Thanks, Councillor Morales. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'm in favor of the amendment. So from what I can see, we're really talking about, unless I'm wrong, and I guess I'll direct this to Mr. Miller, 50 units being the discrepancy is what doesn't align to our policy to date. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Lehman. So the legislation says has to be fully rental units, no owner occupied. So the 50 units is outside of that. The other point that's also outside of it is the 1-year interest-free loan. We have a policy that allows for nonprofits on their deferrals to get 5 years interest-free. Profits are the city's moving average weighted cost of capital. So those are the two elements that are outside of our policy.
Okay, thank you. And in looking at the benefits noted in the staff report around the significant increase to rental stock, our ability to look at allowing the city to recoup the cost of deferral, and that there seems to be a protection in place where unpaid amounts past due can be added to the tax roll, and at least it gives us some security. So I'm feeling quite comfortable in this. I guess my last question, perhaps back to you, Mr. Miller, unless it falls to Ms. Banfield, tied to policy, if it lands in planning or in finance, is the reference to this maybe being an opportunity for us to explore policy setting around, should developments like this come forward, would there be a threshold around proportion of units, and perhaps some learnings through this process? Is that something that is already in place around where staff are going around a potential policy for the future, or would staff need direction to do so?
Through you, Mayor Lehman. So I'm excited to announce that Council gave us direction last year to bring forward a development charge background study update, the new community benefit charge update, and legislation's requiring us to also bring forward a new parkland, or looking at our parkland alternative rates. So we are coming forward with a whole bunch of exciting things in the spring, which will tie into the conversation around affordable housing and what tools and options are available. So it's better to have that conversation actually at that time when we have all of them together at the same time.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm in full support of the amendment. And I guess I would last say as a comment, I mean, we can look at precedent setting at any time, and it's at the will of the council. I think this is great timing to consider how we could explore this opportunity and actually not see 50 units as mitigating us to actually get affordable housing stock online sooner. Well, and not that it's affordable housing necessarily, but that it's housing stock.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. I now have a long list. Deputy Mayor Ward, you're next.
Thank you. I will support the amendment. I think I agree with Councillor Morales that it sets a precedent, but it sets a good precedent. We should be encouraging this kind of thing. If they were building a apartment building on the edge of town where they were requiring new roads and new sewers, I could see the argument. This is actually a place that's occupying an empty lot now. The sewers, everything's already there. The roads are already there. We'll get a lot more tax dollars and development charges from this. And we critically need, I mean, the lack of purpose-built rentals isn't the only reason, but Barrie has the Ontario average, or the Canadian average for purpose-built rentals, that means buildings that are built to be rented. People that aren't living in renting somebody's house or renting somebody's condo or renting a room in a house. The Ontario average is 47% of all rentals are purpose-built. The Barrie figure, according to Stats Canada, is 22.7. It's half the rate. We have a serious shortage of purpose-built rentals in Barrie. This is a way to maybe give them a bit of an incentive to build it. I know these aren't going to be what's classed as affordable, but it does increase our stock of purpose-built rentals, which we're desperately in need of in Barrie. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. Councillor Harris. Councillor Natalie Harris first.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I love all the discussion around the table. So my question, I guess, and my concern is the wording that's in the legislation, that it doesn't specifically match. So would there be a way of changing the wording in the amendment to match timing that Mr. Miller's reports are coming back? Would we be in any kind of legal concerns that we are kind of bending what the legislation is saying it's requiring? Am I understanding that right?
Mr. Miller.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harris, there is an out clause, I'll say, under the Development Charges Act, Section 27. It does say municipality can enter into a deferral agreement with the developer. So it's a bit of a contradiction to their overarching approach, but they have that one clause in there. So that does permit it under the Development Charges Act to enter into such an agreement.
Okay, that helps a lot to clarify things. Great, thanks.
And the other, Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. I'll be quick. I just one thing I hadn't noted, and maybe through you to Ms. Banfield, is there a count of affordable units in this build? I couldn't find that.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Harris, no, I don't believe there's any affordable as defined units in this project.
Okay, thank you. Notwithstanding, that would have been a win-win, but I do appreciate the efforts to put this forward, and thank you, Councillor Thompson. I will be supporting it, and some precedents are good, so thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor Thompson, back to you.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Lehman. Just a little bit of clarity, and I do appreciate Councillor Gary Harvey's approach and concern, but the problem is, and every one of my colleagues has said the same, the precedent we're setting is very good, but the Smart Center development actually has a deferral of 20 years. They'll pay interest on the deferral for 20 years. That's the new legislation. This building would have the same if they didn't have the 5 floors of ownership. If this was an all rental, they would be able to defer for 20 years. So we're actually accelerating the DC payment to staff. And Mr. Miller and I had a conversation today, and we understand that we have to make the DCs whole, but we also have to realize if we don't build nothing, we get $0. And we've got to go with, scaled economics. Like, we build this, there's spin-off, it makes everything cheaper. Like, so if they don't build nothing, we pay interest on debt loads we have today. So on, stuff like the water treatment plant, the bridge, lots of things. So we've got to kind of think out of the box that it's not all about the loss of the interest or something. It's kind of thinking out of the box to see if we can maybe start incentivizing actually shovels in the ground. So that's what I'm hoping to do. And this question through you, Mayor Lehman, is to Ms. Banfield, and maybe I'm reading it wrong, but in our circulation list, it actually says site plan conditions were approved May. Is that conditional site plan, or is it the conditions were met?
Ms. Banfield.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Thompson, it's the conditions were issued. So that's what the applicant is looking to finalize. And as I said, they are quite close. And then once the conditions have been met, they can then enter into the site plan agreement.
Perfect. And just my last thing to Councillor Reitman's concern on the timing. I had spoke with Ms. Banfield on the timing, and this is the applicant applying for the building permit. Doesn't mean it'll be issued, but as long as they apply for it, then it'll be in legal and staff's hands. But I'm pretty confident that's enough time for the developer to apply for it at least. So, and it's only after the agreement is met, the 120-day clock starts. So, thanks. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, other comments? Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, just a question for staff. With the 223 units, roughly how much is the DCs for those amount of units?
Through you, Mayor Lehman. To Councillor Harvey, we don't have the details. I think we give some, I don't know how many, on paragraph 17, we called out there's what the DCs are for one-bedroom units, 42,000, two or more. 30,000 for a bachelor, 42,886 for more. So if you take the lower number and multiply that through. As you're doing that, I'd also just like to clarify one thing. In paragraph 7 of the report, and to clarify the legislation, it's not-for-profit and institutional developments are given 5 years to pay DCs for rental units. It's not-for-profit rentals. Rental housing that is not-for-profit, they have 5 years to pay it off. For not-for-profit buildings that are rented are the 20 years. So it depends how the organization is structured.
Great, thank you. So doing some quick math, at the extreme low end of the scale, it's just shy of $7 million. And when you're thinking about a build of this size, which is probably in the neighborhood of $80 to $100 million, $7 million should not be a make it or break it, or else we've got a developer that's in over their head as it is. So again, I still have difficulty supporting this. This is not enough to incentivize a build of that magnitude. And this is just a developer, in my opinion, coming to the city to get an extended loan on the DCs that should be paid at the appropriate time.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. Councillor McCann.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. And I have to say I pretty much agree with everybody around the table, including Councillor Harvey. But I maybe have a couple questions for the mover, and then maybe a couple questions for Mr. Miller. If you don't mind, Councillor Thompson, how did we arrive here? Like, you obviously had a conversation with the developer, and obviously there's a reason why they're asking. It could be for just because they want to save some money, or is there any issues that we should know about?
Actually, I read the report, and it seems if you read the report, it's not a make it or break it. You know, like, the cost of everything's gone up, and I looked at the report, and Mayor Lehman and I had this conversation probably in June, I think it was, and we had talked about, you know, looking at certain things. It was kind of a very high-level conversation, nothing, you know, and then so I reached out to somebody in regards to this to see, and the kind of tone I got was a little bit, if this could not go through possibly, and it's not about the make it and break it, it's like, so there's, you know, financing. When you're building buildings of this magnitude, you need financing. Very, very few people are self-financed. So I think some of the conversation is it's not losing the money. It's only the deferral. Like, so they would have to pay it up front, and it's 3 years, but we finally get it, and it'll be paid under occupancy. As soon as they take occupancy, they pay it in full. So it makes our DC bylaw full. It's the interest paid on deferred bylaws goes into the reserves, and that's how we, you know, could lose money. But if you have nothing, you get nothing. Like, so, you know, half of nothing is nothing. So that's what I was trying to do. It was more to kind of guarantee the build for something we really need. And that's how I come about. So,
Sorry, so you haven't talked to the developer? You're actually doing this on your own fruition? This is not a request from the developer? This is you coming up with this independently?
yes.
Oh.
So I actually spoke with them after on some timelines and stuff like that. But it was just to make sure, like, I don't want to come to council without the knowledge of them. Like, and I say 120 days, and, you know, we have this debate and stuff, and they need 150 days. Right? Then this point would be irrelevant then, you know, to try to incentivize something, it would actually be a hindrance to them. So, yeah, we had some conversation after my initial thought of this.
Okay. That's not the direction I thought that you went, but okay, so if you do this independently, I get it, because you obviously want to have apartment buildings and you want to have maybe affordable housing if they're having it. I would like to maybe dive a little deeper maybe with you, Mr. Miller, and I think we've got just under $1 billion that we're expecting to come in on DCs, right? And I do think that, I believe it was Councillor Ritma that made a comment about, you know, incentivizing builders to build, and this may be an incentive, where clearly this is not an incentive for them to build. This is something that the Moving the Motion wants to do independently. And I'm just trying to find out what the ramification would be, what the negative outcome would be if this did become a precedent. And you may not be able to answer me tonight, which I'm fully, you know, mindful of, but I would maybe like to have that discussion with you this week before it comes to council next week. Can you comment on that, or would you prefer us to have that conversation maybe when you've had to be able to digest it?
Yeah, through you, Mary Liam. Thanks for the question, Councillor McCann. You know, in isolation, is this a dangerous precedent for the city? In isolation, no. But if it's a policy decision of the city that we're taking going forward, then yeah, I'm losing sleep again. But if it's only because, you know, the idea is you've got the development charges, we're treating everyone, we're in relation to the act, we're doing everything we're supposed to, and everyone's being treated fair and equally. So if you're picking and choosing now who benefits and who doesn't, you know, that's a challenge, I think, from a financial standpoint. So I'd rather make an overarching policy decision. I think that's when we do the work in the spring with council. I think that'll really help, because then we'll have a better, more wholesome understanding of the impact of these type of policy decisions. So that's really my concern. It's just the precedent is, why wouldn't another development come knocking on the door and ask for the same treatment?
Yeah, and I think there's actually, I think Councillor Thompson said there's probably a hybrid here, and quite frankly, I mean, I like this direction if people get shovels in the ground earlier, right? And I think first come, first serve, it would be a great starting point, and have a dollar amount, and the first people come in get this gift of you know, interest-free DCs. And then I guess that my next question would be, talking about this particular investment, this particular building, you know, what are the costs if we do defer the amount? Because obviously, as I think Councillor Thompson said, the pipes are already there, the infrastructure is pretty much already there. We're not starting from ground zero like we are in the annex lands. What would our cost be?
So through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor McCann. So if it's 1 year interest free, and the lowest end was $7 million, but if I take an average and say, let's say it's $10 million in DCs, so 1 year of interest free at the current rate of 5%, it's around $500,000 that, you know, would be the cost to the city directly.
Right. And I guess maybe the next question I have, whether to the mover or to you, Mr. Miller, is there any other cities having this type of framework? Are they incentivizing builders by doing this right now?
So through you, Mayor Liam. So it is in the Act. It is paragraph Section 27 of the Development Charges Act. So I don't have any specific examples, but I'm sure when we do a deeper dive, we could look into that to see what tools are being used to incent development, whether they're using deferrals or not. I think the challenge of the city of Barrie right now is it's positive to see there's a lot of development happening in the city. But we are relying on a lot of development charges to pay for that. So it's the balancing of, you know, how much you're going to give to incent one development. It's really taking a more holistic approach of, you know, what's the big picture and what are the objectives that we're trying to ultimately achieve. If this is one tool, then that's certainly one tool we can look at. But it's just remember, there's a lot of money that the city does need to collect to put in a lot of pipes. While there may be existing infrastructure there today, I can tell you from the gentleman sitting beside me and his team, as they look forward to a lot of dealing with the growth that's happening in the downtown area. There's going to be capital works once things get built up in the downtown. So that's all I would suggest. I would say in isolation, this is not not a problem, but it's just if it's precedent, then I think it becomes a bit more challenging from a financial standpoint.
No, I do appreciate the answer you gave, but that wasn't really the direction I was going. I understand that we're going to be losing $500,000 in interest if there's $10 million in DCs. What I was asking is, we still need to cover the cost of DCs that would be paid forward, right? So what money do we actually need to take out of one bank account and actually pay for that infrastructure for them to be able to build?
Sorry, Mayor Lehman, I didn't quite follow that. Maybe just
So when they're going to be building, we collect DCs, right, of $10 million because we need that money to help build the infrastructure, right? We're saying the infrastructure is already there, right? So, but I'm saying, is it 100% there, or there is actually going to be money that we need to transfer from one account to actually pay for the cost that we would have got from those DCs for this specific project?
So way I'd answer that from a financial lens, in terms of any needed infrastructure, I'd have to defer the question. But if you look in the report, and we did call out last year that the end of, I think it's 2023, we are expecting development charges to be negative.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if that doesn't happen, that's in a very positive situation. But we're taking a look over the next sort of 10 years, right? So if we don't have the cash coming in and we're still incurring development charge costs, then we're taking it from other cash flow, right? The other cities' working capital, and that's sort of where the pressure is.
I guess my last question is, so I'm going to be supporting this, but I would like to have a deeper discussion with you because I think that we need to set some type of framework because, every single developer is going to come looking for the same, sweetheart deal, right? We have, I think Michelle Banfield commented maybe 9 months ago that we have 19,000, 20,000 units that are approved by the city but not have shovels in the ground. Is there any insight that you may think if we gave them some relief on DCs that they would have shovels in the ground?
Ms. Banfield, want to take a crack at that? Do you hear that as the reason why people don't go from planning approval to building permit approval?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor McCann, we have heard that, and in particular with the landowners in the secondary plan areas, we do work with them on the phasing of their subdivisions to spread out and smooth out those DC costs.
Okay, I will prove it tonight, but next week at City Council, I definitely may bring this back up and get some more detail. But I would like to have some more insight and some more discussion with you, Mr. Mayor, please. Thank you.
Others who wish to comment on the amendment? Councillor Morales. Oh, sorry, Councillor Natalie Harris, I saw you first.
Thank you. My question, I guess, would be tonight if it passes, and then, we'll have the week until we can talk about it more, but maybe we could come back with something that's a bit more of wording around the next council would look into policy that would, word something that wouldn't be a worry of a precedent financially. That this is just the first time talking about this around the table. So just throwing it out there. I'm going to approve it tonight, but I think there's a way of probably coming forward with, making everyone happy around the table to make sure that this isn't just a blanket precedent if we are concerned. Even though some do see it as a good precedent, maybe some don't. So I think there's a way of figuring that out after.
Thanks, Councillor Harris. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Question for Mr. Miller. I'm going to hybrid Deputy Mayor Ward's comments and Councillor McCann's questions. So the comment being, we're not, the high density of this existing land that is already serviced means we're getting value for dollar. We're not building a new subdivision in Ward 9, Ward 10. So, and I'm going to kind of piggyback with what I think Councillor McCann was trying to ask here. If this land stays as is, which is decrepit, sterile, and fenced off, maybe we clean a sidewalk. We clean, for snow and minimal maintenance. If it gets built, is there any significant capital improvement, pipes, sewers, capacity that needs to be built as a direct result in this specific corner, not the whole city, as a direct result of this tower going up?
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales, I guess you're assuming it won't get built if they don't get this approval. So if it doesn't get built and it sits empty, there's an opportunity down there down the road is what I would suggest.
Let me just reframe the question. If this tower gets built, is there something that the city would have to do in terms of a capital improvement that it wouldn't have otherwise had to do? And I just saw, Mayor Lehman, I just saw CEO Pro's.
Yeah, I was going to go to Mr. Arania-Sundrin. Is there any capital works associated with this development?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales. Development charges pay for infrastructure that is local and also pays for infrastructure that transmits from the actual development to the treatment plants. So even a development of this nature will require infrastructure, especially in terms of the transmission infrastructure as it relates to water and wastewater and the treatment works that are required for additional capacity. And given that the high-rise developments typically feature a lower amount of DCs, I think it could be argued that the amount of DCs that they are paying will pay for infrastructure that's needed to service them. Yes, in terms of local pipes, there may be some reductions, but I think that's also reflected in the lower DCs. So I think to answer your question, yes, the DCs from this development will pay for infrastructure that's required.
CEO Prost, did you want to add to that?
Thanks, Mayor Lehman, to you and members of General Committee. I don't have much to add except that I think when Council and the public talk about intensification, we see that as a good use of existing infrastructure. It's important to note that all growth requires additional investment in capacity and services. So there is no intensification that is, found money for the corporation, the City of Barrie. All of it gets reinvested back in additional capacity, services, those types of things. So, well, certainly at the end of the day, intensification is the preferred type of development to keep us on the right side of the fiscal ledger. The reality is there is no development that's no cost.
Councilor Morales.
Thank you. I'll just clarify my question. Is there any specific capital? I'm not talking about rec fees. Somebody might, go use a rec center or more firefighter service. Any specific localized capital investments that would need to be created as a direct result of this tower going up?
Mr. Arania-Sundrin.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales. If by local you mean infrastructure within, say, a kilometer of, no?
Oh, I mean directly as a result. Let me just get a little more specific. So this tower goes up, the current pipes, sewers, natural gas, whatever, cannot handle it. Therefore, some sort of investment to pump the water to that height or to redistribute it to the main network has to happen. Not necessarily, I'm not asking more people are going to be there, therefore the sidewalk is going to age 3 years faster. I'm not asking that. I'm asking direct as a result of this.
So, through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Morales, as a minimum, you would need treatment infrastructure, which is what development charges pay for, in addition to transmission, whether it's pump stations, to get water to the development. So there will be various infrastructure improvements that will be required over time to service this development. It may not be required right on day one, but to service the overall growth program, you will need infrastructure.
So I'm just going to make a couple of comments, Mayor Lehman. So as in regard to the discussion that happened, obviously this is an efficient development. This meets our strategic plan of a vibrant, growing, people-friendly, people-present downtown. This is also something that the Downtown Barrie BIA Board has been advocating for at different public meetings that have minutes and have records, different chairs, including the time. More eyes on the street means more people living downtown. So this is something that definitely we've been advocating for. So anybody can really say that they support housing and care whether people can live affordably. It really takes a real vision to actually follow through with it. Something I wanted to clarify that with the questions Councilor McCann was asking Councillor Thompson. It appears, and please somebody clarify me if I'm misspeaking here. It appears that this may have been an independent idea by Councillor Thompson, but it was an idea not in a silo. It wasn't in isolation. He consulted with a person of industry, a stakeholder. Actually heard about this over the summer by another member of council too. Actually didn't act on it. Councillor Thompson did. He took that next step further. He made sure the time parameter worked for them. It's something that everybody seems as reasonable on the table, and this is, again, another proposed solution to getting more housing built of all types, of all sizes, for all people in an area where this is not phase 3 of Ward 10. This is not phase 2 of Ward 9, where we have to pay a $30 million pipe. It is about creating more roofs over people's heads. And because of that, I don't feel comfortable taking the let them eat cake approach. If it was just somebody making more profit, more capital, fair enough. But the laissez-faire, let them eat cake approach, it's not something that I'm feeling comfortable when we have a viable amendment that is going to get more roofs built for people. That's what makes it different for me. And the fact that, again, it's as Deputy Mayor Ward said, and we all know, this is an extremely efficient use of a site that currently is fenced off.
Others wish to comment on the amendment? No? Okay, a couple of questions for me. So I think we went down a few rabbit holes here. DC's, sure, this building might not require a new pumping station, but 5 or 10 new buildings in the core requires a new pumping station, and that's hella expensive. Who's going to pay for that? The new units have to pay for that through development charges. So whether the building has high infrastructure costs associated with it or not, the whole point is DCs are pooled, and any time you give a break, the pool gets smaller and the taxpayer gets to pick it up. I guess where the comment I would make is, on the surface of it, I would never support this. This is a for-profit development. There's no affordable housing guarantee. It's a giveaway. However, here's why I am going to support it, because it is an unusual, very unusual circumstance. I think the precedent that I'm concerned about is unlikely to be a problem. So I'm just going to ask a couple of questions about that, because I think people need to, we maybe need to understand exactly what's being discussed here tonight. And I think we got off on the wrong tangent in how to think about this. So, Mr. Miller, if a for-profit developer comes in and want to build rental apartments, doesn't matter whether they're going to charge $1,000 a month or $3,000 a month in rent, under the legislation, if the whole building is rentals, they can defer their DCs for up to 5 years under the new legislation. Okay. So the Ontario government has said, municipalities, you got to do that because we got to get more purpose-built rentals built. More supply is good. Generally, we're going to not worry about whether or not it's at $1,000 or $3,000. We're just more supply is good. So municipalities, you have to allow a for-profit developer to defer for up to 5 years their development charges if the whole building's purpose-built. That's the legislation. That's correct. Okay. The only reason this one isn't getting that exemption is because they have 50 condo units and 223 purpose-built rentals. Now, the argument against doing that, because I was part of this discussion when the government was advancing this idea, is that, if you throw 50 condos in there, you're going to sell them for $1 million each. You just made $50 million. You can probably cough up your DCs. So maybe we shouldn't cry poor. The problem, and the reason I'm going to support this is twofold. One is with confidence that the next council will take a comprehensive look at this. I actually question whether this staff report was in order, because we're a lame duck council, and this has monetary implications of up to $500,000. I think it is in order, because what is being requested is a deferral of a development charge payment date. It has an interest cost. That's a very real cost, members of council. If the city has to borrow another $10 million because we didn't receive development charges, our treasurers just told us the cost to the taxpayer is $500,000. That's what you're proving. The only reason I'm willing to support this is because the vast majority of these units are rental, and we're at this really weird point in construction right now where we have seen other high-rise projects at the very least slow down. Nobody's canceled yet, but there's some that have slowed down. And the reason why, go to the City of Barrie, or the Barrie District Real Estate Association statistics. Average sold price, all homes in Barrie, down 12% in 1 quarter, down 13% on the year. Depending on the size of the condo, you've got different amounts, drops, but in some cases, more than 20% in the sale price. But at the same time, we've had Stats Canada report a really stunning 22% increase in the cost of construction. So what I'm now being told, because I check in regularly with the people who want to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in our city, is that the math suddenly doesn't work. And so if we want to see these projects go forward, at least give me a little breathing room to go make it happen. So with respect, Councillor Harvey, I do believe the amount is material, $9 million on a development like this, or even if it's only 7, Mr. Miller's used 10, it depends on the unit mix. It's somewhere from 7 to 10 million. I think it is material to allow a deferral for 1 year. Let's keep in mind, if they didn't have the 50 condo units in there, they could have deferred this for 5 years, and we'd be taking a $2.5 million interest hit. So while my sympathy for the developer, to be frank, is pretty limited when you've got 50 condo units that you're going to capitalize up front, because the economics have changed so much, and because, as Deputy Mayor Ward has very well laid out, we have such a shortage of purpose-built rentals in the city, I do see the value in giving this developer, frankly, 1/5 of what they would have got if they just rented all the units. And, you know, I think purpose-built rentals can be built by well-capitalized, very large development companies because they can afford $100 million in construction cost on the strength of the income to come later and their own borrowing capacity. That's not the same for all development consortiums, and that was one of the reasons the Ontario government put the purpose-built rental deferral piece into legislation. So my sympathy is limited. I would not want to see this become a standard practice. My one fear about precedent is now you're going to have developers say, oh, well, we can still have 20% condos in our building and still get the deferrals. So Barrie Council, you've set a precedent. I'm going to come in. I'm still going to make my $100 million on condo sales off the top, and then I'm still going to expect you to defer my DCs. Because there's a comprehensive review coming, because it's a 1 year, and I think Councillor Thompson's amendment, by the way, is very well crafted to put a time incentive on it. That's something we have seen be a problem in Barrie, people not pulling their permits after a planning approval or flipping a project. So I'm going to support this one because I think it's been very well done, and we're at an unusual time. I am a little concerned about the precedent, but the precedent I'm not concerned about is, hey, rental buildings get to defer their DCs. Guess what, guys? If it was all rental, you'd be giving them a much larger deferral period. So the one concern I have is that next council, whoever's on it, don't let the practice of I'm coming in with a couple of floors of condo, but I still want my taxpayer-funded loan to become your standard practice. That's the comment I'd want to make before I call the vote on the amendment, which I will do now. All those in favor of the amendment, please indicate. I am as well. Opposed? 1. That carries.
Separate report.
Separate report's been requested, Madam Clerk, for that one item. The other item that was held tonight is a confidential litigation matter. Madam Clerk, are we doing those here or are we doing those in the Sir Robert Barrie room? Okay, I will need a public motion to move into closed session to discuss the confidential litigation matter, Ontario Land Tribunal Appeal, Mapleview Drive. Can I have a motion to move into closed? Councillor Kungl, seconded by Councillor Harvey. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay. That motion is carried. We will move into closed session in the Sir Robert Barrie room. And we will do inquiries and announcements after that, I suppose, and the circulation list items. Okay, yeah, we'll take about 5 minutes before we convene the closed session. Sorry. Yeah. All right. I will call General Committee back to order in open session. For those in attendance tonight, the committee discussed a confidential litigation matter, Ontario Land Tribunal appeal on Mapleview Drive. There were no votes taken during the closed portion of the meeting except for the procedural motion to move into open session. Deputy Mayor Ward, I believe you have a motion.
I do. Confidential litigation matter, Ontario Land Tribunal appeal, Mapleview Drive. 1, that staff be directed to implement the steps outlined in Appendix A to confidential staff report LGL 004-22. And should the application be resolved, the mayor and city clerk be authorized to execute any documents that may be requisite. And 2, that the staff report be made public after council approval.
Thank you very much. Any comments in public session on this matter? On the motion? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor of this motion? I am as well. Those opposed? 2. That carries. Okay, we have no reports of officers, items for discussion, or information items that we have yet to deal with. It does bring us to inquiries. Deputy Mayor Ward, do you have any inquiries?
I have none.
Members of General Committee, inquiries of staff. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. If I may direct it to Ms. James Reed. It might have been covered in circulation, but in general, Route 4, I believe, around the bus routes was returning to full service today, I think. I'm noting this because it's a main route in Ward 3 where several residents are taking multiple transfers. And my awareness is that Route 4 does apply to 4A and 4B. Are you able to identify if that notice has gone into the paper? I have some residents asking about where to find out the information about the changes back to the 30-minute transit routes for Route 4.
Through you, Mayor Lehman, to Councillor Kungle, thank you for the question. Yes, all that information is on barrie.ca. There is also a little tool that you can help plan your trip, so that would be updated as well. And I can confirm that that is in our This Week in Barrie advertisement as well. So if a resident has trouble, they can certainly call Service Barrie, and they can help trip plan as well.
Great, thank you. That's all my questions for staff.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. Any other inquiries of staff? Seeing none, announcements, Deputy Mayor Ward.
I have none.
Announcements, members of General Committee. Councillor Kungle.
Thank you. Well, if I may, on behalf of the Active Transportation Sustainability Committee, we have our first Barrie Bike the Night event this Saturday. So this is a City of Barrie event in partnership with Living Green. I am hoping many have seen the great media that has been put forward by staff and others, but do want to welcome the public, members of council and staff, of course, to be participating. As a reminder, it is a free event, but we do ask you to register. The Eventbrite information is on the Living Green Barrie Facebook page. And we do meet at Meridian Square for activities between 5 to 7 p.m. At 7 p.m., residents are asked to bring your bikes decorated to be reflective. There will be many draw prizes. We're seeing great sponsorship from different groups that will be highlighted at the event. And we will take a leisurely ride through Open Air Dunlop in partnership with the BIA down Lakeshore and back. So we hope to see many there. The messaging for residents is this is about active transportation. So city staff are there with the city bus to show people how to rack your bike on a bus, and hoping to really have moments of that route where we're intersecting new or very experienced riders with traffic. So thank you to Barrie Police and others, but also across the board. Exciting that the learning from Guelph has come to Barrie and that this has been a supported event by council. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kungle. Any other announcements, members of General Committee? Sorry, you have a second one?
I do,
Go ahead.
sorry. And it's a reminder, although it is public facing, that tomorrow night at Planning Committee, we have a Ward 3 development. So for 303 Cundles Road East, there is a planning zoning bylaw amendment at the meeting. And I believe you'll find more details around what's being presented by the developer online through the city website under developments in Ward 3.
Thanks, Councillor Congo. Just to be clear, that's a public meeting, so no decision tomorrow night, but it is the opportunity for residents to have their say on that proposed development, so thank you for that. Any other announcements? Okay, seeing none, I just have a few. We did proclaim September 10th as Parkinson Canada Superwalk Day, September 12th to the 18th is Battle of Britain Week, and we had the raising of the Royal Canadian Air Force flag this morning. It's also Terry Fox Week in the city of Barrie next week, September 18th to the 24th. It's National Forest Week, and September 17th to the 25th has National Coaches Week. Lots of weeks happen in September, usually 4 of them. The City of Barrie is reminding residents that they must be on the voters list to vote in the 22 municipal election. Electors on the voters list will receive a voter information letter starting the last week of September. Of course, there's information on our website at barrie.ca/elections. We'd also like to encourage people to keep reusable items out of the landfill by participating in the next curbside collection of textiles. So textile collection, old clothes and other textiles, September 12th to the 16th this week. There is information on our website as to how you can put your textiles out for curbside collection, barrie.ca/alternative options. We have now all of the circulation lists that were published over the summer. Members of council, rather than reading off all the dates, I'm going to give an open call. If you have any circulation list items, we're going all the way back to June 30th. Once a week, the circulation list was published over the summer from the 30th right through until today, September 12th. Are there any items from any of those circulation lists that members of the General Committee would wish pulled or referred? All right, well, they must have been great lists, very comprehensive. We do have a council meeting next. Madam Clerk, do you need any time before we move straight into council? Just a couple of minutes? Okay, so this completes the General Committee meeting. I'll ask everybody to sit still, though, because we'll get started with council in just a couple of minutes. General Committee is adjourned. City Council will commence in, we'll call it 3 minutes.
That's me. Please rise as you are able. I now call this meeting of City Council to order.
We acknowledge tonight this meeting is taking place on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. The Anishinaabe include the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. We're dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture, moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. You may be seated. Tonight's City Council meeting is being held with members of Council, the Executive Management Team, City Clerk and the Deputy City Clerk in the Council chambers. Members of the Senior Leadership Team and other staff are available to answer questions in person and via video conference should the need arise. I'll just note, because I think there was a late start to some of the coverage, we did observe 2 separate minutes of silence at the beginning of the General Committee meeting. Apparently that was not broadcast, though, so I just wanted to make that note at the beginning of this council meeting that we earlier observed the passing of Her Majesty, and also a minute of silence for the victims of the car accident a few weeks ago. We have only one item on tonight's council agenda, and that is the General Committee report dated September 12th. Deputy Mayor Ward, do you have the motion?
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thompson, that Section C of the General Committee report dated September 12th, 2022 be adopted.
Thank you. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Ward and seconded by Councillor Thompson that the General Committee report, Section C of the General Committee report dated September 12th, 2022 be adopted. Section C is FIN 010-12. That's Parkland Alternative Rates. Comments or questions on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor of Section C, or any opposed? None. That carries. We have no other business for council, with the exception that I think there was an announcement we missed at General Committee. Deputy Mayor Ward, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman. There's a virtual public meet, a virtual neighborhood meeting this Wednesday at 5 o'clock. It's to do with the proposed development at the corner of where the empty lot is at the corner of OWEN Street and Collier. It's proposed to be a 32-story condominium and commercial building. If anybody's interested, they can go to the City of Barrie website and go under Proposed Developments, 49 Collier Street, and find out information about how to attend that virtually.
Thanks for that, Deputy Mayor Ward. Brings us to the bylaws. I think you have a confirmation bylaw for us. Well, actually, I think there's two.
One.
Go ahead.
Yep. First, moved by myself, second by Councillor Thompson, that leave be granted to introduce the following bill, and this will be read a first, second, and third time this day and finally passed. Bill 79.
Thank you. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Ward, seconded by Councillor Thompson, that leave be granted to introduce the following bill, and this bill will be read a first, second, and third time this day and finally passed. Bill 79, cash in lieu of parkland bylaw. Comments or questions on the bylaw? Seeing none, those in favor of it? Anybody opposed to it? None. That carries. Confirmation bylaw.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Thompson, that leave be granted to introduce the following bill, and this bill will be read a first, second, and third time this day and finally passed. Bill 80.
It's moved by Deputy Mayor Ward, seconded by Councillor Thompson. Leave be granted to introduce the following bill, and this bill will be read a first, second, and third time this day and finally passed. Bill 80, the confirmation bylaw. Comments or questions? Seeing none, those in favor? Anybody opposed to the confirmation bylaw? Nobody ever is. That carries. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Councillor Kungle, seconded by Councillor Thompson. Quickest council meeting ever is adjourned at 9:16.